Welcome to Actions and Limits. My name is Justin Atherton. I'm the Peak Performance Consultant for Confidence Unchained. With me as always is Paul Fortune. Paul is a mindset coach and the founder of A Call to Action. And together, we make Actions and Limits. Welcome to the show, the podcast where we talk about the actions we can take and the limits we create. This is the first episode of season 2 for Actions and Limits podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Find us on Facebook and Instagram and follow us there. And so you're not missing on any of the upcoming interviews. Paul, a year. We've been doing this for a year, man. Did you think we'd get this far? Like when we started, honestly, what was your thought? Like how this process would go?
I don't want to sound cocky or conceited, but yes, okay. I did think we were going to be doing this, for a while. I felt like, we were in that point in our careers in the coaching business. This is a great tool for us to get to know other coaches and get to know people and get to know their stories. So, yeah, I did think that we would be doing this for a year, but I'm very humbled with all the people that have played, downloaded our episodes and listened to it and the great feedback that I've gotten. I mean, my birthday was not too long ago and people wished me a happy birthday and I said, thank you. And they said, oh, by the way, I watch a lot of your videos and I've caught your podcasts from time to time. And that really made me feel good just by saying that they've been watching or listening to our podcast, watching it however they do it. That made me feel good that, that we're putting out content that people like, that we're entertaining. Because, obviously we want to help people in a self-help way, because we're coaches, but we also want to kind of entertain the audience. I mean, I don't feel like, we're, that Ben Stein that we're just, I hope that, that our personalities resonate with people, that,
Sure.
That we like to have a little bit of fun, with it, and we enjoy doing it. And boy, I mean, we had so many great guests. Is there a guest or two that stand out in your mind that you're like, oh, wow, that was great?
Man, picking guests. I mean, my first thought of what you were saying was like the confidence in saying that you're like, yes, we were going to make it like more than a year. I love that.
Confidence Unchained, baby.
Yes. I love it. Thanks for the plug there, Paul. I appreciate that. But yeah, the feedback from everybody. And I think the biggest thing I've heard is like people asking, where are you getting these amazing guests? Like a lot of people have been like, hey, man, this guy was really amazing. I don't know if I could pick, one of my favorites, but I know that Dr. Gleb was one that I got a lot of feedback about. We've had Dr. Gleb on the show twice. One was more recently about COVID when that was kicking off back in March. And
that was a scary time, wasn't it? I mean, nobody really knew about the virus, and he's telling us what his hypothesis of what was going to happen. And boy, I know this episode is going to be about being uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable with what he was saying. I don't know about you.
Yeah, a lot of it, he was talking about the new norm, right? Like, expected this was going to last. And I think a lot of people did not enjoy hearing what he had to say on that episode, because they're like, no. That's not going to happen. This isn't going to last more than a couple months. This is not the new normal. Well, 6 months later, it is. It's still persisting and with no real end in sight. So, so he was one of the guests that I got a lot of feedback about.
And he's a great fan of the show, and he's brought a lot of good content and guests our way. So I have nothing but great things to say about Dr. Gleb because he's been an advocate to the Actions Limits podcast. And
Dr. Gleb is super awesome. Man, who was the magic guy? I was watching some of his stuff on LinkedIn recently.
John Petz?
Yes, John Petz. I think he was probably one of the most entertaining guests we had on the show. a lot of good energy. He's a really great speaker. I still follow some of his content, on LinkedIn and some other. So I think John was another probably one of my favorite guests that we had on the show. He was really
And
good.
Alexander Fleiss, he's got to be up there too. That guy was just a
Yes.
wealth of knowledge. He just,
Yeah.
with different avenues. And, he actually made me feel good about, the technology piece on where technology is going. He had good insight on it. He was talking about, hey, it's going to create more jobs than lose. So this is a great thing for us to embrace technology because, as we get older, we get more and more scared about technology, and it's nice to have somebody like him to say, oh, no, that's not the case. It's you're going to have to adapt, yeah, but there will be opportunity for you if you're willing to adapt. So that made me feel good. So he's another one of the great guests.
Yeah, I was taking
Chuck Thrash, right?
Yeah, I was taking notes for Alexander. Yeah, Chuck. He's been on the show a couple times. Architect out in California. Really, really great guy. I know. He was talking a lot about leadership the first time he came on the show, and really his unrealizing leadership that he's had in his company, and going like, I never wanted to be a leader, but I just was. So I think that was a great message for people, going like, hey, it's not about your desire to want to be a supervisor or a leader. It was just like, hey, do the things that you think you're doing right by the people that are around you, and then good things are going to happen to you. And they're, like he said, he moved up so fast in his company. It was like they saw in him what he was doing. Like, yeah, hey, let's get this done. You care about the people around you. You want to lift them up as well, and that shoots you right to the top, and you end up being a really great leader.
That reminds me of another guest. Perry Mothmer, love, and I think that's what Chuck Thrash does. He leads with love, and I think that Perry hit the nail on the head with that, and his message really resonated with me with that message. Don't lead to because you care about these people, not because you want to be the person in front, that you care about pushing everybody forward.
Yeah, no, I really liked Perry's message too. Like you said, that idea of lead with love. You should be putting all of your time and energy into developing the people underneath of you, and that's how you get raised to another level, because people will want to follow you, because a leader is nothing without followers. If you don't have any followers, then you're just going for a walk.
That's right. Oh, that's it. I like that. Did you just make that up right now?
I heard it from somebody else.
Okay.
I'm not gonna.
I love that. That's a good saying. Now we're laughing, but that reminds me of another guest that made me laugh throughout the whole interview. I have a person in mind. I want to see if it's the same person that you have in mind.
You laughed through the whole interview?
Yeah, I laughed pretty much the whole interview. I mean, there was some serious parts of it, but the overall thing, how he was talking, I was laughing. I thought it was great, and not in a bad way. I was laughing at him. I was just laughing, because he.
Was it Brian?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Brian Kasparidis, I believe I'm saying his name right. He wrote the book, How Not to Be a Big Jerk.
Yes.
We got a lot of good feedback on his episode too, but he was just such a down to earth guy.
Yeah.
Like, hey, this is how it is. He's like, I was being a big jerk, and nobody was, and I was like, why isn't my life working out? He's like, oh, because I'm a big jerk. He was just so down to earth. And I think he was very entertaining. He actually, I think when we had him on the show, he talked about, having him back on. So we're going to have to reach back out to Brian and be like, hey man, come back on the show and tell us what you got, going on. I know he had some other, projects in the book. So yeah, man, we've had a lot of great guests, man. And I'm looking forward to all of the guests we have moving forward. Yeah, it's been a fun ride, Paul. So let's
absolutely. I mean, thanks to producer Glenn, who's helped book all these guests for us. He's been a key point man.
Yeah, key point man in helping grease the wheels of the Actions and Limits podcast and keeping us moving along. So speaking of moving along, we've got a guest waiting for us. So let's go ahead and bring out our guest. I know that you were on his podcast recently. Remind me of the title again. It's called man, it's slipping my mind.
Well, let's ask him.
We'll ask him.
Yeah. We'll ask him.
The name of
Yeah.
his podcast. But
Okay.
he goes by Stu, but it's Stuart Luciow. He's got a little brief bio here for us, Paul. He says pretty much his entire life, he's been the type of person who you think would have everything under control. Stu's always been composed, had the answers. He was the rock for everyone, but he never let anyone in. All of that changed for Stu about 3 or so years ago due to the work and the relationships that he built, and they help him push him along. Long story short, for Stu, he wasn't ready for his promotion in his business, and it was probably the best thing that happened to him. And he now shares his story on his podcast about being vulnerable and how to be okay with being uncomfortable and calling that out. So, in his podcast now, he shares his message with others on how to continue to be vulnerable and in his own process, working through that. So everyone, let's go ahead and welcome out Stu to the show. All right, everyone, welcome Stuart Luciow to the show. I know you go by Stu. Stu, welcome to the show, man. We're really excited to have you here on the Actions and Limits podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Had Paul on mine, and I'm really glad to be joining here.
Yeah, thanks for joining, bud. So tell us a little bit of what you got going on. Tell us about things that you're working on. We know you're a podcast host, but give us the rundown. What do you got going on, Stu?
Yeah, picked up podcasting pretty much because of COVID. It's something I've talked about and said that I wanted to do for years and years now, and kind of just put it off. And between COVID and then everything with the protests and Black Lives Matters, it's like, okay, well, I can sit and not do anything, which is one thing, or I can try to have an impact or create a platform or a voice. So I decided, why not? Let me just start with a podcast and kind of take it from there and see where it goes. So honestly, just for the past couple of weeks or so, just been podcasting. And then outside of that, I'm a business analyst in finance and been working from home since March. It's also been an adjustment, but I think I finally got the swing of it. It'll be more weird going back to work at this point than it is just being at home and doing it. And then, my girlfriend and I are house hunting as well. So that also looks very different due to everything going on outside, but exciting, a little nervous. It's been good.
Stu, due to your bio, it sounds like you had some sort of an epiphany. Can you go into that? What happened in your life to bring you to where you're at right now?
Yeah. So the biggest thing I struggle with is vulnerability, just outright, especially from an emotional aspect or just sharing. And I guess a little bit of backstory there. When I was in middle school, my grandfather died, my dad's dad, and it triggered his bipolar. And we didn't know that he had bipolar. So he was diagnosed in his 20s, but they never told my mom or anything like that. And I'm an only child too. So it was just me, my mom, and my dad living together. Really, really rough time. You had the manic episodes. He's up all night, he's in the basement, he's out all night doing all these things. Then you had the depressive side where he was talking about jumping off a bridge and, just outwardly saying these things. It was terrifying. And it got to the point where he actually moved out for a little bit and lived in a motel, and he refused to talk to my mom. And, there were times where I used to have to walk down to the end of the court to meet him and beg for money because my mom didn't work. She was stay at home. So he's the only one that actually was able to provide money for the house and the bills, and asking for money so I can bring it back, give it to my mom so we can have food and keep the lights on. So it was interesting because.
How old were you at that point, Stu? When you were?
So what is it, that or so? Well, at the time, I thought I had to be there for my mom. I had to be the rock. I had to be strong. I couldn't be the one that broke down or was vulnerable.
Sure.
And I also didn't have anybody to share that with. Like, I had no one else to go through it. It was just myself. And for a long time, for many, many years after that, looking back, like whenever I'd share that or talk to people about it, I'd say, well, how did that impact you, or what did you take away from that? And for the longest time, I would say, well, I just had to mature faster, as things that at that time so small, because like there's bigger things in the world to worry about than whatever it is. Did you score a touchdown or not? Like, big deal. Um, but more so, I'd say over the past 4 years or so, definitely been a deeper understanding of how that's actually impacted me even more so, whether it's defense mechanisms or, like I said, from a ability aspect. Um, you know, one of the things from a realization is my best friend from middle school came out here a couple of years ago and just got to talking and shared everything about that time with him. Best friend, I mean, like, best. We, in school, we were together 24/7. Summertime, we were together 24/7. Like, we could not be separated. And I shared everything with him, and he goes, like, I had no idea you were even going through any of that. And that hurt me, because here I am with my best friend who we've gone through so much together. We spend so much time together, and I couldn't even open up to him in the moment and talk about what was going on in my life. It hurt. It hurt. And then from a work perspective too, there was an impact, because I was a manager at the time and I was working towards senior manager. And the conversation was, keep doing what you're doing. Everything's fine. You're going to be good. And my leadership came out, because I'm here out in Arizona and they were on the East Coast. And they flew out and they sat me down and they said, Stu, you're not ready. You're not vulnerable enough to lead this team, especially with them being on a separate coast. Like, if I'm sitting there saying everything's good, I got everything fine, nothing's wrong, like, they don't know, because they're only talking to me. That was another piece that hurt really bad. And, I went back home, was really upset, came in the next day and sat down with my manager. And that was the first time that I truly asked for help for something. Because that's one thing that I definitely did not do until then is, hey, all right, I hear what you're saying, vulnerability. I have no idea what to do. I don't even know what that means. Like, I need your help to figure it out. And that has put me on this amazing path and journey, probably for the past, like I said, 3 or 4 years of trying to figure that out and actually work on it. One of the biggest steps or takeaways from that conversation was share it with everyone, right? Share it with your team, share it with your peers, let everyone know what you're working on and have them hold you accountable to it. And that was also hard for me to do, because of, everything with my dad and my mom. And it's like, I have to be the rock. Everything has to be fine. Everything's perfect. I can't crack. So being able to go to someone and say, hey, I struggle with vulnerability. If you ask me a question and you feel like I deflect it back on you, call me out. If you ask me a question and you feel like I'm giving a half-assed answer, call me out and make me go deeper. It was truly the first time that I actually went to someone and said, this is what I need from you in order for me to work on something.
So how do you take those tools that you've learned and those lessons that you've learned? How are you pushing that out now with your message, with your podcast, and the things that you're doing? Like, what is your biggest message around that?
Yeah, for me, it's just creating an open and comfortable environment where people feel okay to share. And a lot of it is listening. I don't think a lot of people do a great job of listening, to the point where you're actually in the moment. It's easy to just sit there and already have a thought of what's next in your head or what do you want to say as someone's speaking, versus truly listening to what someone's saying and being able to pick out the important pieces of that. Follow the emotion. So a lot of people, when they talk or whatever, if you follow the emotion, right? If you notice someone's getting a little bit more emotional about a certain area or topic versus somewhere else, well, go to that, because that means something to that person, whether they realize it or not, and kind of dig in. So for me, it's really just about people coming on and sharing and being vulnerable, talking through a current situation or problem. And it's not really to resolve it. Like, I don't expect in an hour that we're going to, solve every problem that they have, but let's connect some dots. Let's dig in. Let's ask questions. Let's get a little bit more uncomfortable. And I think there's a selfish aspect of it too for me starting this podcast, because it forces me to get vulnerable too and share my experiences and my story, which I'm not comfortable doing. So it's a double-edged sword in a good way there, to kind of force me to do those things. And yeah, for the listeners too, it's, hey, you're not the only one going through something. And I think that's important because that's what I felt like when I was a kid. Like I was the only one going through this. I can't talk to anybody. No one understands what it's like. And I shut down. So if people are listening, the hope is maybe they're going through something similar that my guest is. And even if they just feel better of, okay, I'm not the only one, like, that's a win for me.
Stu, did you have this conversation with your parents about this epiphany period in the last 3 or 4 years about, you being vulnerable? So have you gone to them and say, hey, I had to be this rock. I had to be this perfect kid. And I really wasn't. I was putting on this front so that you guys were okay. Have you had a conversation with them about that?
Yeah. So I don't really have a good relationship with my dad right now. Haven't talked to him in years. And my mom, we're trying to mend that relationship, but it's still a little rocky. Um, that's been tough because even the last time we talked, or I think last time we saw each other in person was maybe like 2 years ago. She's out in New Jersey, and she came out here and she made a comment, something along the lines of like she works at Kohl's, and the comment was basically, even with everything going on with your father, like nobody knew, right? I always put on this face. I was always happy, like everything was fine. And in that moment, I realized, well, that's also probably where I picked up some of that. Is almost emulating or seeing how she's responding and doing the same thing. And I don't know, it's been tough to try to talk through that with her. I don't know if it's just the way that I'm messaging it or the way that she's hearing it, but there's just a miscommunication there. So the few times that I've tried to talk through that, I just feel like it just did not become a good conversation.
It almost goes back into that listening, right? Like trying to hear what that person's saying, without having that judgment, without really inserting your own thoughts and perception into it, in your own personal life. So in those things you're sharing with others, and how to be vulnerable and how to be uncomfortable, which is something Paul likes to talk about a lot. Like, be uncomfortable, like figure out how to be okay being uncomfortable, right, Paul?
Yeah, I think we talked about it on your podcast, Stu. I think that was a big thing that we talked about together, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's huge.
Yeah, and figuring out how to have those tough conversations, right? And being okay, being uncomfortable having these tough conversations, whether it's with your parents or someone else, or these tough topics that come up. So yeah.
Stu, if you could wave a magic wand and make the perfect situation, I understand that nothing will ever be perfect. That perfect's doesn't exist. But what type of relationship would you want with your mom going forward?
Oh, I would want a great relationship, like a really strong one. There's no doubt about that. Like, I'm about to buy a house with my girlfriend, down the future, hopefully we'll have some kids and everything too. And I do want her to be a part of that. It takes a lot of energy to not include someone in your life like that. You know what I mean? And just to not have that weigh me down, because it does. And it's challenging at times. And even when I don't think about it, I know that there's reactions or feelings that come out at times that are, I think are completely unrelated, but definitely tie back to that. So yeah, if I could wave that wand, like I would want a great relationship with my mom. Absolutely.
And how has your girlfriend played a role in this transition period? Did you know your girlfriend before these 3 or 4 years, or did you meet her while you were going through this transition?
It's been like 2.5 years. So I was still talking more with my mom when I met my girlfriend. So she's been through some of that transition where it's kind of separated. She pushes me in a good way and challenges me to have a conversation, to reach out. And, I can be stubborn, and then sometimes it's my way or the highway. So she does a good job of, hey, well, your mom's sitting over here, and this is what it might look like from that perspective. She doesn't back down. So I appreciate that she's actually helped me kind of get back to fostering a relationship with her versus just completely cutting it off, which I would have done if I was just on my own.
Sure.
Well, in terms of your relationship with your girlfriend, you talked about this being vulnerable side that you're trying to force yourself to be more uncomfortable. How has she helped you in that discovery?
Yeah. I think no similar than the work situation. She calls me out in those moments where I shut down. or she feels like I'm not giving enough or sharing my emotions. Like I said earlier, like I struggle with emotions, and sometimes I just have to state it because I don't necessarily express it on my face, or else someone doesn't know what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking. Almost over composure, I guess, is like an area of opportunity to work on. So yeah, she will force me to have those conversations, whether I like it or not. And yeah, it sucks in the moment, or I might get frustrated at first, but I always look back and I tell her too, like, thank you, because if she didn't do that, like, I wouldn't make progress.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. What you're talking about right there is really identifying those emotions. And that's a big thing that I talk about with my clients, something called the emotional matrix. And what it sounds like you're dealing with is that whole aspect of, being on the verge of being maybe an emotional mute, just not being able to express it or not knowing how to pinpoint it in certain ways, which is a common thing with a lot of people. But the fact that that it's there, the fact that you're like, hey, I'm trying to work on this. I'm pushing through these uncomfortable moments, identifying these emotions, stating it, because identifying those emotional states are a huge factor in how we, push through that moment, whether it's, relaying that information to the people that we're communicating with, or identifying it to ourselves so we can process through those emotions. So just the fact that you're owning that and being okay, being vulnerable, pushing through that's a huge advantage that you have over other people that are like, no, I'm not gonna feel these emotions. I'm not gonna put myself there because I don't enjoy being uncomfortable. I don't enjoy being vulnerable. So I give you props that you're working through that process too.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to admit you need to work on something, right? It's easy to stay comfortable and just deny and be good. And, I am a firm believer that it takes a village, because these are things that I'm working on the past 3 or 4 years and really trying to figure out. Now, when a situation comes up, what am I going to default to by myself? Am I going to default to what I've been doing for the 28 years of my life of just emotionally shutting down and disconnecting and just walking away from a situation? Or am I going to do what I've been trying to do for the past couple of years? It's going to be what I've been doing my entire life. And that's where people come in, like my girlfriend, like the people that I've had at work, to call me out and pull me out of those things, or else, yeah, you can't do it alone. You really can't.
Yeah, and that's what Paul and I talk about. But that's why people hire coaches, to have that motivation, to have that voice, and go, hey, look what you're doing again. You're falling into these old habits, and so we all need that. Even Paul and I talk about this. Even coaches need coaches. It's like, hey, look, I need to talk about this. Paul and I talk about certain things sometimes. Paul and I have different people that we communicate with. So you're definitely right. It does take a village. We need those voices in our head because, we have all those negative voices that come in, and sometimes it's hard to shut those out and really be above the thought, is the concept, and see these thoughts as they come into our view and go, do I want to act on this thought, or do I want to, pass on that and go, no, we need to go do something else. But like you said, Stu, having village really helps. It inserts all these positive voices, into your space. That's why it's so important to surround yourself with positive people that want you to do better. And that's always a big factor that I've seen in anyone that I'm around.
Stu, there's a lot of people. Your story resonates with me because there's a lot of people that unfortunately go through what you did as a child. With you having to be an adult before you were an adult, which is very, very hard. So my question to you is this: if you could have a conversation with a kid going through a similar situation, what would you tell the kid?
I mean, the first thing I would say is you're not the only one. It's okay. It's not your fault. And also don't feel like you have to take on the entire world yourself. And honestly, I would just sit there, and whatever that kid needed, I would try to provide and or talk to whoever's around and say, hey, this is what it looks like. And that could be, maybe you just need to sit with someone and just not talk. And we just sit there in silence for 15, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. Maybe you need some questions, or you just need the vent. Like, just being able to create an environment where that kid feels comfortable enough to share what's going on inside and know they're not alone, is what I would do in that moment. I think that's some of the stuff that I didn't have now. um, I wasn't sharing stuff, people had no idea, but then also, even if someone did that, I think it would have been hard for me to open up. It's challenging.
Why would it have been hard for you to open up if you were in a safe situation, like you really trusted this person, maybe an uncle, an aunt, or whatever, but that you really trusted? Even in that situation, you wouldn't be able to do it, or you just didn't have anybody that you could actually talk to?
So I didn't have anybody, or at least I thought that. And I think a big piece is just the fear of judgment, like putting on a face for my friends, and not being or feeling like I'm weird or wrong or different or something's off. And like I said, I think being an only child kind of put that under a magnifying glass for me in the moment, because as a kid, it's like, well, I'm by myself. I need to do whatever I can to make and maintain friends. And if I go in and just vent about these things, are they going to look at me weird? Are they going to make fun of me? Are they going to call me out? Are they not going to talk to me anymore? So I put a lot of that pressure on myself too. And, I had some great friends, like I said, and unfortunately in the moment, I just didn't share any of that.
Yeah. Those are a couple, huge human behavior traits. We're so focused on avoiding being embarrassed, by our peers, by the people around us, and then also we don't want to look bad. Whatever that means is, if it's about the clothes we wear, the job we have, the things we say, we're so concerned about what other people think, and that is so prevalent when you're younger. Once you mature and realize that people are dealing with their own things, they're not even thinking about you. And that's the huge part right there, is everyone out there that's so worried about other people's judgment. They're so worried about other people point fingers at them that they don't have time to even think about what you're doing. So that would be a huge thing to pass on, to the younger generation, right, Paul?
Yeah, I was going to say, Justin, I know you can resonate with this one because I think your clients even said this before, but like going to the gym and being intimidated because, I don't have the right physique and everybody's going to laugh at me. But if you really study people at the gym, they are just looking at themselves in the mirror the whole time. They don't have no idea who anybody else in the gym. They're just looking at themselves. But because we have this insecurity about ourselves, if we haven't gone to the gym in a long time, we feel like they're pointing at us going, oh, this guy, what is he doing?
Even the big guys in the gym, they're like, oh, my arms aren't big enough. I need to, man, there's always someone bigger, right? So they're like, they're always, like you said, either looking at themselves, critiquing themselves. And like you said, Stu, if we can pass that on to the kids, younger generation, be like, look, no one cares.
Right. That's exactly
do you.
Yeah. Look at the bigger picture, because it's easy to get microscopic, right? And all of a sudden you go down this rabbit hole, everything snowballs, it's the end of the world. But if you have someone there, or you can just take a step back and just look at the bigger picture, it's not a big deal. 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, whatever it is, when you look back, you're probably not even going to remember what it was that happened in the first place. So it's going to be okay.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing I'm attempting to pass on to my daughter. It's really hard when you're only like 9 or 10 years old, thinking about like, oh, this is really important because it's going to matter in a year. Oh my God, a year is so, huge to a kid, right? But for us, we blink nowadays and a year's gone. So did it really matter? I really like the quote saying, if you're trying to make a decision, or if you're really stressed about something, if it's not going to matter in 5 years, forget about it. Like, don't even worry about it. So
with that being said, though, Justin, I think that it's very important, and I know you do this, but it's very important that you do give your daughter empathy, because it is important to them. I mean, in the scheme of things, you're the teacher, you get it. It really is not, but it's very important to them. So you got to show empathy, because they feel it in their heart.
You're right. Showing that empathy and being like, hey, I get this is very important to you, but then also, writing that line of like, hey, but think about the big picture, like Stu said, is it really going to matter in the big scheme of things? And yes, the younger you are, the harder that is of a concept to really grasp, like you were saying, Stu. So, but it's an important thing to walk that fine line, like Paul said, have that empathy, understand where the person's coming from, but also be like, hey, but think about the big picture. Think about everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's different levels, and everybody needs something different in those moments. I think that's where communication is huge. Sometimes you just need an ear to listen. Like, you don't even need to say anything. Let me just get it out. Sometimes you need me to validate and just say, yeah, you're right, that absolutely sucks. And then other times, you're coming in looking for advice, and that's where it's like, I hear you, but X, Y, and Z. I think that's really important, and it happens a lot. And there's just miscommunication up front, and just cause a lot of frustration instead of understanding.
Yeah, I heard a really great concept recently. I was talking with a group of my friends, and the concept was, if you have someone that comes to you with a dilemma, ask them up front. It's like, hey, are you just wanting to vent, or are we going to problem solve here? And you give them the power in the situation. Because if they're like, hey, I just want to vent, I don't want to work on solutions, I just want to vent. Hey, then you give them that, and you let them, vent for 15 minutes, whatever the time frame is that you're setting up, and be like, hey, is there anything else? And it's like,
who was the guest that went over that with us?
Was that Dr.
Brickman?
Was that Dr. Brickman that kind of talked about that a little bit?
Yeah,
just a while back. But I've had it reiterated since then. In having that idea where you set this parameters of the conversation up front. Because if someone comes up to you like, hey, no, I really need some help thinking through this problem, and then the communication is clear. Because sometimes people don't want a problem solver, they just want to be able to vent, and sometimes they do want that ear to be like, hey, help me with this, help me think through this. So that's another way up front. And yes, you're right, Paul, it was Dr. Brinkman that talked about that, but I've heard it in a couple different situations since then. I think that's really powerful, to be clear on what the communication is up front.
Yeah,
it can really make a difference, right, Stu?
Yeah, and that applies to so many different aspects, even beyond just that kind of situation. When I think about giving feedback, and when I say that, whether it's positive or constructive or whatever, usually constructive, right, is hard. That's tough to do. You feel it in your gut. It's always going to be uncomfortable, whether that's at work or personal. And there's some things you can do right away. Just call it out up front. Hey, this is really uncomfortable for me. This is really tough for me to do. Like, that instantly clears the air a little bit, right? It puts you in a better mindset, and you just put it on the table up front. There's so many different areas where if you just state these things, and, even for me, with not being able to show my emotions as much as I would like to on just my face or physically, it's no different. I try to state my emotion in front. Hey, I'm really excited right now. I'm really frustrated, or, I'm feeling pretty sad, because now someone knows exactly where I'm at and can better align with the conversation or pick up what I'm putting down.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you have this platform to put it out there, your podcast. Tell us the name of your podcast, Stu.
Yeah. So my podcast is called Be Unguarded. And like I said a little bit earlier, I have people come on and just talk through a current situation or problem that they're dealing with. Not to solve it, but just to explore it, ask questions, dig in, maybe connect a few dots. And then for anybody listening, maybe relate to it and realize they're not the only one going through something.
Awesome.
Yeah, I have to say, I go on a lot of podcasts, to promote this podcast and my coaching business. And going on your podcast, it was different. You went personal, and I'm good with it. But it took me back a second, like, whoa, wow, we're gonna get Paul a little uncomfortable. I'm like, okay, let's spice it up a little bit. So I appreciate that, Stu. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on and reaching out and everything.
I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it. I'm like, you made Paul uncomfortable. I gotta listen to that episode. I'm like, okay, all right, good job, Stu. So Be Unguarded. Okay, everybody, make sure to check out Be Unguarded. And I'm sure it's on every podcast platform. Is there several ones that you normally push it out through?
Yeah, I have a link tree on my Instagram and everything, but typically you can find it on Spotify, iTunes, all the major ones.
And what's your Instagram? Share that with our audience.
My Instagram is just @Be Unguarded.
At Be Unguarded.
Yes,
Okay.
keeping it simple.
Stu, is there any other projects that you're working on, or what is the main thing that you're pushing out, through your podcast or alongside your podcast?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is just connection. It's easy to feel like we're separated, especially now, whether it's looks, age, race, gender, you name it. But if you just sit and listen for a minute, like there is a lot more we all have in common than we realize. It just takes a little bit of listening, maybe a little bit of questioning, and just having a good, real conversation, just being in the moment.
I like that. I like that idea of being in the moment. So Stu, we like to wrap up our show by asking our guests a couple questions, with the title in mind, Actions and Limits.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is one action that our viewers and listeners can implement right now to make a huge change in their lives?
Yeah. I would say think about setting small goals for things. And on the topic of vulnerability, set a goal of share something you normally wouldn't share. Doesn't have to be anything crazy. Doesn't have to be anything extravagant. Maybe it's something you did over the weekend that you normally don't talk about. Maybe it's a hobby you have. Maybe it's a feeling that you're feeling. Make it a point, maybe start, hey, once a week, I want to make sure I share something new. Challenge yourself. All right, let's do it twice a week, 3 times a week. And eventually you'll get into a rhythm and into a pattern. You won't even realize you're doing it, but you're sharing more. And you'll realize your connections and relationships will just inherently get deeper through that.
I like that. Share more, the things that make you uncomfortable, to make you, feel vulnerable. So just share something either once a week, like you said, baby steps, graduate through 2 times a week until you're doing it every day, multiple times a day, right? So the opposite side of that are these self-imposed limits that we put on ourselves. What do you see that people, limit themselves in doing, or a limit that really needs to be removed that can make a difference in our lives?
Yeah. I think it would be around believing in yourself, just the self-confidence. I think at times we can be our own worst enemies, and we can set these unrealistic expectations to go along with it. So give yourself some grace, and put yourself out there. If there's something you're looking to do, just do it. I like to use this like metaphor, for example, of smoking, right? I can sit here for 10, 15, 20 years and say, hey, I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to do it. I'm going to try. But I don't. But then one day I stop. From that day forward, I stopped smoking and I'm good. It wasn't the 10 years of talking about it, the 15 years of talking about it. It was a split-second decision to say, I am never going to pick up a cigarette again. Split second. So when that comes to anything that you're trying to do, instead of overthinking it or going down these rabbit holes, set a small goal and make a split-second decision to do it. For me, that was doing the podcast. It was, I'm going to put a post out there and see if anyone responds. And people did. And now here I am interviewing people and have episodes up. So it can really apply to anything that you're doing.
I like that. Be decisive, get rid of those, doubts and those fears that are, holding you back, and really just make that decision and go with it. I really like that, Stu.
And it sounds like you did a call to action.
Yes.
little self plug there for Paul. He's putting out there. Well, Stu, thank you so much for coming on the show. You're a great guest. We'll make sure to put your contact information, and so our viewers and listeners can listen to your podcast as well. So again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us, Stu.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Really, really excited and was glad to be here.
Awesome. Thanks. Paul, Stu was such a great guest. I'm so glad he was sharing his story with us, and that process. And I know you and I like to talk about this. If one person's story can really resonate with one of our audience members, our viewers or listeners out there, and if it can, make a change in what they're doing, or realize like, hey, you're not the only person out there dealing with this. So I hope that someone out there really resonated with Stu's story, around vulnerability, around the idea of being uncomfortable. And I really thank Stu for sharing that story, because it was uncomfortable, and it was him being vulnerable, right? So he was doing what he's talking about. So I know that's something we always talk about on the show. So
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to repeat something I always say on this show. Vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. And in the moment that we realize that, the moment we grow and we figure out ways to get over what we are vulnerable about. And it's all about that awareness, being aware, I'm vulnerable about this, reaching out. And, it was interesting, and I didn't say it to him, but his first step about being vulnerable is going to his boss and saying, hey, I don't know how to be vulnerable. That's being vulnerable, right?
Sure. Yeah. He put it out there. And like he said, you have to own it. And he was wording it in different ways, but we've talked about it plenty of times on the show. Owning your emotional state, owning what you're going through can help you push through it. Because if you just hold on to it and go, I don't want to feel this, guess what? It's going to be prolonged, and you're just going to feel it for a very long time. Maybe you're able to hold it back, but when things get tough, when life gets hard, because it always does, then that emotion comes back up because you never processed it. But when you own it and be, hey, this is how I'm feeling right now, and then you can push through it, you can learn from it, and then you can grow, and then the sky's the limit from there, right?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly what you're saying. It's about putting yourself out there, being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that is very hard to do because, our body wants us to keep us safe. So that comfort zone feels so good. So once you try to break away from it, it's tough. But if you do it all the time, if you challenge yourself, public speaking, doing podcasts, reaching out, asking for business as a coach,
Sure.
different things that you putting yourself out there, you do it all the time. It still might be uncomfortable, but it won't be as uncomfortable because you're constantly pushing yourself.
Yeah, talking to strangers in elevators,
Grocery stores,
we can't do it anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's a little tougher now with masks on, talking with people, but
or smiling at people, knowing that they're smiling.
You have to smile really hard, get your eyes,
with your eyes,
get your eyes in there really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely a message that we've had throughout the show, and glad to have Stu on our anniversary show. This is the beginning of our second year moving into the show, so really glad. The message hasn't changed, Paul. It's staying the same. We're true to form. We're talking about the same topics, having different people come in and share their experiences. So really glad to be kicking off our second year with the Actions and Limits podcast, man. So
I think our messages has strengthened through this season. So hopefully we can just make it stronger and stronger as we go.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So let's wrap up the show again with another segment of Ask Paul Anything. Paul had a question come in from Jeff in Montana. It says, Paul, how has your life been different than what you'd imagined?
Well, I guess I basically pick an age where I thought my life's going to be something or not. Well, let's do this. Okay. In my early 20s, let's say mid 20s, after I graduated college, and getting into the banking industry, at that point in time, I thought I really wanted to be a CEO of a company. I thought that's where my path was going to take me. And, due to, 2008, 2009 with, the economy crashing and different regulations and different companies that I worked for that, I may not have liked as much, made me think about really myself. And I did a lot more self-discovery about who I was as a person and what I really wanted in my life. And so, I thought I was going to want to be, to answer the question, I thought I was going to be a CEO. That's what I wanted to do. And now, just turned 40. That is definitely not the journey I want to go now. I want to take my business to the next level. I want to do speaking engagements, and I want it to be on the self-help realm going forward. So
that's good. And sometimes it's tough for people to have that realization and really go and be okay with that shift. So that's great that you're okay with that and go, hey, this is what I originally wanted, but my path has changed, and just be like, hey, I'm rolling with it, and I'm gonna kick ass doing it this too. So I think that's a huge thing for people to take away and not really remove that identity from what you thought was going on. So I like that, Paul. I like that. So everyone out there, continue to send your questions in to the Actions Limits podcast at actionsandlimits@gmail.com, and you can have your questions featured on the show. So Paul, another great episode, another a kickoff to our second year doing this podcast. And like you said, our message has just gotten stronger over this past year. And I think that it's going to continue on that path. So another great episode, Paul. Looking forward to a lot more.
I would agree with that totally. For Justin Atherton, this is Paul Fortune. We'll see you next week.
All right. See you next Monday. Thank you for listening to the show. Don't miss an episode. Click and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on your favorite podcast platform, and find us on Instagram and Facebook under Actions and Limits to stay updated on all our upcoming content. Continue to email the show at actionsandlimits@gmail.com for our segment Ask Paul Anything. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.